Welcome to the Solid Signal Podcast for June 16th, 2014. We're almost to July 4th, and I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to 3 days off filled with barbecue and beach. I hope that you are too. We are coming into the summertime, and it got me thinking that it'd been a while since I talked about one of the most basic subjects that we have, something that I really haven't discussed too much, although it's critically important, probably the most important part of your home theater system, and you think about it less than any other part, and that's grounding. Oh, I hear you not grounding, but groaning, and I know you're thinking, oh, this is an incredibly boring subject. Well, it's incredibly boring if you don't think that being struck by lightning and having things explode is incredibly boring. Well, then maybe that's incredibly boring. But grounding and avoiding lightning strikes in the first place is incredibly important, as I said. You know, it's all fun and games until somebody gets hurt. That's what people say. And grounding is what makes sure that nobody gets hurt. Oh, it's not like grounding is a new idea. It's been around for about 200 and something years. Benjamin Franklin, that Benjamin Franklin, discovered that it was possible to put a metal rod on the top of a house, run a wire down that rod, and connect that wire to a post dug deep into the ground, and that lightning would strike the rod, and the electricity and lightning would flow harmlessly down into the ground instead of burning down your house, which was, well, pretty important considering there were no fire departments in the 1700s and pretty much everything was made of wood. Today, lightning strikes and protecting yourself from them are equally important. Even though, of course, we have fire departments, they are the last things that you want to use. And you want to make sure that everything that you have is properly grounded so that you can be as safe as humanly possible. Keep in mind that proper grounding is not going to prevent 100% of damage. There could still be something, and the best idea is not to be hit by lightning at all. But you can be as prepared as possible. Make sure that everything is as good as possible, and save not just your equipment, not just your house, but also your life. When you think about it that way, hey, it's a little bit more interesting of a subject, isn't it? And that's why I hope that you are taking the time to review and make sure that everything you've got is properly grounded. Remember that antenna or dish on the top of your house is probably at its tallest point, and it's made of metal. So lightning is going to be very attracted to it. And whether you're in the east, where the rainy weather has been absolutely incredibly overbearing, or out in the west, where it's incredibly dry, lightning is a real concern this time of year. Proper grounding begins with using the right supplies. I'm going to put a link to our white paper on grounding up on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. And if not, just go to the Solid Signal blog, click on that downloadable guides tab on the right side, and click on a guide to grounding. But as much as we have a good selection of grounding products for you, it is critical that you contact your city, county, or state and get a copy of the most current ordinances for your area. You know, from a legal point of view, I can't tell you exactly what to do, and I certainly can't force you to do one thing or another, but you must ground, from a legal point of view, the way that the city, the state, the county wants you to ground. And ordinances are different everywhere. That's because different areas have different concerns, whether you're in the mountains, in the deserts, or in the jungle. Grounding usually is done by attaching a grounding block to the coax cables coming from your antenna or dish. Those cables are attached to the antenna and dish, so they do carry electricity through, and then the grounding block allows you to connect a grounding wire, that green wire, and then run it either to a cold water pipe if that's legal in your area, or to a grounding rod, or sometimes to the electrical breaker box if that's legal in your area. The goal here is to force that electricity to go down into the ground where it's harmless instead of going into your house where it will blow up your sockets, make your receivers do a little dance, and probably catch fire, and let's face facts, that's going to ruin your whole day. Even if you do believe that your equipment is properly grounded, this is a perfect time of year to get up on a ladder and check. You know, there's nothing wrong with taking 15 and 20 minutes and just making sure that the connections to your ground wire are nice and clean, that the ground wire itself is attached properly, and that it's running to the proper location, whether that's, as I said, a junction box or a ground or a cold water pipe. You might be wondering, well, what do I need to ground? Well, you certainly need to ground anything that's on the roof. everything that's on the roof if it's made of metal. It can all go to a common ground location, but in some cases it can't share a common ground wire. That's something that you need to take up with your city, county, or state. If it were me, I'd be grounding everything that was outside, just to be 100% sure. But as far as things that are inside, I know, for example, DirecTV multi-switches and splitters all have ground wires coming off of them. That's kind of up to you. If the whole system is already grounded because you've got ground protection outside, you're not necessarily going to need it necessarily inside. It's not going to give you necessarily any more protection. But remember, check with those ordinances because I don't want to send you astray and I don't know everything about where you live. Remember, for example, that if you're using DirecTV equipment, it's got those two-prong outlets, so it's not taking advantage of your house ground. So making sure that the dish is properly grounded is incredibly important. Speaking of your house ground, it's not a bad idea to pick up one of those little outlet testers, the ones with the little 3 lights and 2 of them light up if everything is okay. And then test all the outlets in your house that have anything valuable connected to them to make sure that the ground works. Sometimes the homeowner before you might not have hooked up the ground wire properly, or, well, let's face facts, you might not have done it properly yourself. If you have any questions about grounding, we can help you to some extent, and also, like I said, check with your city, county, and state, and don't be afraid to bring in a professional on this. This is super important, folks, and as much as we like to say do it yourself, sometimes it's okay to know when you need a little extra help, and this one is just too important to mess around with. That's about it for the podcast this week. You've probably noticed that I've been ending the podcast without a lot of rambling on from now on because I think that a lot of listeners already kind of know what they're getting. But do feel free to suggest a topic using that Suggest a Topic button at the upper right-hand corner of blog.solidsignal.com. And I will see and hear from you next week.